And I'm so happy to see you all who have come here tonight to have some wonderful time of learning with Danté and of time for some conversation, I hope. And as you can see, he's traveling, but graciously giving us the time, even though he's in the car. And just want to tell you all that he's not actually driving. His wife is driving, so we're all good.
Yes.
He's not going to crash. But Danté, we are absolutely delighted to have you here. And those who are here have read your bio on our website, I'm sure.
Beautiful.
Um, and some will have read Shoutin' in the Fire, an American
Beautiful.
Epistle, and some will be eager to read it after meeting you tonight. Um,
Yes.
but Danté and are just meeting for those of you who are here. And I was telling him a little bit about alignment and the wonderful authors we have to come who share from the heart and soul of their work that they offer in this world. And Danté has a very moving story and powerful voice to share with us. We're so grateful you're here. And Danté, it is my practice not to share people's stories for them, tell people's stories for them in a formal bio, but to let you share your story in your voice. So we
Indeed.
pass it over to you, and we're so
Wonderful.
deeply grateful that you're here with us tonight.
Wonderful. How's everyone doing? Y'all doing great?
I'm doing great.
Oh, good. Oh, wonderful. Thank you, alignment to the alignment community. I'm very grateful to be with y'all tonight. And to those whose face I can see, I'm very eternally grateful to be with y'all. This is actually very funny because this is my first time ever. If I could be honest, I was actually not. Mario, you're gonna laugh at this. I was my family and I. We were in Europe for the last few days, for the last week, and it's been a trip that we take have been taking every year. It's just been a really good time to just get out of the country for a bit and be together and go to Christmas markets and meet new people and connect with old people we've met over the days and kind of gain new experiences and things like that. And we just got back yesterday and we stayed over in Washington D.C. Just got on the road today, and when Margaret called me, I was actually knocked out and have fell asleep to Doom, Part Two, which is a fabulous movie, actually. And so I'm very grateful that I can have some coherent thoughts after being knocked out for about 30 minutes after driving. So, to tell a bit of my story, if I can, I would love to just tell you a little bit about the last few days of my life. Um, and maybe I can read a poem, and then from reading a poem, I'll share with you a little bit from this little journal that I keep on myself. And then Margaret, you and I, we can have more conversation. Is that okay? All right, totally fine. Okay, I'm going to read you a poem that I wrote. Um, it was it's this poem that's just very dear to me. One in which it's a homage to every part of myself that I've had to leave behind, every part of myself that I still have, and every part of myself that I'm still discovering. It is a poem that is very much a love song to the natural world, to the cicada, uh, but also a love song to the version of me that has made me who I am today. And through all I've gone through, raised and and went to play football in college, and then ended up getting married and going to be a writer and a father and military spouse and all these things I am right now. It's very much about this courageous decision to do what the poet Nikki Giovanni, who God rest her soul, just recently passed, says, doing the best we can with what we have. And I think that's what we all try and do. Our calling as people of faith is simply this: to lean into our traditions, to the best of our traditions, to do the best we can with whatever we have, to try and make sense of it, to try and uh, put together some coherent thread of life and love and liberation, or if We think about the Constitution, that we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, to establish justice and ensure domestic tranquility. And in order for us to ensure tranquility, we must be we the people, and we must do the best we can to lean in the best of our tradition. So it's also, and a love song to the traditions and things that made us and the people we carry with us, even ourselves and everyone we've had to leave behind. So I'll read this poem and I'll talk a little bit about this little journal, and then we'll go from there. Is that cool? Can y'all hear me? Can you hear me good? Okay, cool. All right, let me get this poem and then I'll go. All right, perfect. I'm going to read this poem and then I'll go from there. Let me pull it up real quick. It is a poem entitled The Head That Wears the Crown. Hold on, give me 1 second. My apologies. The head that wears the crown. It's true that I'm all fear and a hand that holds on some cards. As a green jacket covers how little I am, noticed by no one. All I've wanted was to be everything and nothing at the same time. Maybe we are here to live and to die and to breathe and to exhale and have nothing to show for it. It was the other night that I curled myself into a cocoon, my rings ripped off by the broken sound of my ego. And if a thing dies before its time, what use was the appearance of light? Or use were the eyes that saw the coming of the Lord? And then I say to myself, if he shall come, let it be a merciful reordering of the cosmos, that it feels something like the night sky in the country where I am from, South Carolina, dirt, marrow, broken heart, love. How little we understand that a ball in the hand is more than skill, it is a magical thing. The heavens have opened up and swallowed me whole that night that I prayed and heard not a word, felt my belly cave in on itself until every line of my intestines was pulled in whatever direction another has summoned for it to go. I told myself, you are more. Then I have reminded myself that my favorite kind of sickness is when I have ejected the bitter contents of another person's will. Ejecting the hatred forced down my throat, lodged into my esophagus as I tried to speak, and then I have forgotten the sound of my own voice. I want to tell you a story, a bitter story, a peaceful story, a story so bright and so magical, a story so buried. I want to motion my palms toward the air between us and open the door to another life, a life in which none of this matter, and a life in which everything is rendered lovely because we have no language to disregard the truth of ourselves, to be who we are. What we are is a sacred gesture. And once again, I clasp my hand toward one another, and maybe the last syllable that becomes a closed casket on our praise will feel protective, like the blue jeans that weigh more than the fear of what people have thought of me. Maybe I'm like you, one of those people who, when the cocoon opens up and the brightness stars flicker and your shoulders begin to tremble and your ribs begin to crack in place, you run toward the angels who wait in praise for the head that erupts from the ground. As the cicadas sing their song one to the other, arise, arise, arise. The boy has become a hum, a witness to a time and a story that never ends. The head that wears the crown. I was on my way from Paris. One of my best friends, whose mother has been sick for a while, gave me a call before the flight. And as we do, oftentimes we gripe about life, gripe about writing, we gripe about everything that we are complaining about, whether it's how hard words are, or how hard life is, or how hard everything just feels. And we get on, we catch up, and we say hello, and we say goodbye, and all these things. And in between the hellos and goodbyes, we find a way to remind each other why we are doing what we are doing. And so sometimes we talk about songs, sometimes we talk about books. This time, we was talking about the Thanksgiving meal he cooked, and which Thanksgiving didn't go the way he wanted to, so he had to alter his plans. And just like life happens to so many of us, sometimes we have to make the courageous decision to show up, even if we don't have everything that we want to have in that moment. But we realize that we can take what we do have, and what we do have is everything that we need in that time. And so we're talking on the way back, and we're talking about this film entitled Living. I don't know if any of you ever watched that film. Who is played by the actor. I think his name is Bill Knight, or something like that. And it follows a Japanese story, short story of a man who has lost his vigor on life. Um, he works at a local company at a he works for the city, and he is the one who is responsible for getting better educational resources, getting playgrounds, and getting this and getting that. And so there's these three women who come into his life, who comes into the office, and they beg for a playground. He denies all of it, and he takes the denial, and he sets it on the shelf. And as he's setting it on the shelf, there is a young man who comes in who's just now working to that company, just got a job at the company, a young man who wants to be like this older gentleman named Mr. Williams. Well, Mr. Williams, he's an older man. He's about 80 at this time. And Mr. Williams, he never looks people into their face. He's just kind of going about life so much so that a woman comes in and she works, and she has a nickname for everybody in the office. And her nickname for this man is Mr. Zombie, because he is someone who is living outside, but he's dead on the inside. So as the movie follows the man's story, he has two children who he loved, and they love him, and he lost his wife. And so he gets the news in the story that he has a terminal illness. He has cancer. And his cancer diagnosis, the doctor gives him a few months to live. And he goes through that time where he's going through, as Kubler-Ross says, the stages of grief, as so many of us go through, whether you're like me growing up, in South Carolina and having to make choices about football and life, or those of you who read my book, I go through the stages of grief in the book. I go through anger, I go through depression, I go through bargaining, and then I go through acceptance and just have to deal with life as it is and figure out a way to put the piece back together whatever way I can. And so all of us go through that. He went through the stage of grief. He had his wild time where he met a man and he almost drank his life away. Then he had this one idea. That same woman who had the name of him, Mr. Zombie, he ends up getting lunch with that woman, and he confides in her. He says, "Hey, can I tell you something? I haven't told this to my children, but I don't have long to live." And he says, every time since when I got my diagnosis, I began to look at you differently. And the thing that he began to notice about her is she had a joy about her. She had a vibrancy about her. And he said that when he saw her, he remembered all of the times that when he was younger, all he wanted to do was just simply be a gentleman. He saw the men in suits in Britain walking to their jobs, well put together, and all he wanted to do was be like them. And then something happened in his life in which he lost all his vitality. Whether you're an individual or you're talking about a nation, many of us are in threat of losing not just our vitality, but our identity, losing who we are. And anytime you lose who you are, you forget what you're here for. Anytime you forget what you're here for, you will always find yourself losing who you are. So Mr. Williams has dinner with this young lady. She thinks that he's becoming infatuated with her. And he tells her, "I'm not becoming infatuated with you in that way. What I'm infatuated by is your love of life. And every time I look at you, I remember everything that I've lost." When that movie ended, the young man who showed up when Mr. Williams, before the diagnosis, the young man who showed up, he began to befriend Mr. Williams. And he began to notice something in Mr. Williams, that something was happening. He was changing. And he saw Mr. Williams' body beginning to become frail and all of these things. And at the end of the movie, you see them befriending one another. And Mr. Williams leaves the young man with a letter after he dies. And the letter tells the young man, who he opens it a few months after Mr. Williams passes, there's a line that I never forget. And I wrote it down in this little journal. This little journal goes with me wherever I go because I never, one of the things that I realized is that like every one of us has an interesting life and we have something to offer to the world. And every one of us are artists. We have something to say. And the only way that we're going to continue to believe it is to bridge the gap between what we tell ourselves and the evidence of who we are. The only way that we can remind ourselves of the evidence of who we are, the places we've come from, the lessons we've learned, is keeping a kind of spiritual archive of the self. The journal, like Mr. Williams's life, is a sort of mirror or portal into the self. The journal is a time traveler of sorts. The journal is honestly sometimes the most honest or the most risky part of ourselves. And in order for us, I think, especially as people of faith, to be the best, to do as Nikki Giovanni, I'm kind of rooting this in doing the best we can with what we have, is we gotta revisit the spiritual archive again and again and again. Because sometimes, like Mr. Williams, we forget where we've come from. Whether it's you being a writer or you being a poet, you simply just working a job that you know, that you've been doing for years. I think all of us need to revisit our spiritual archive to remind ourselves who we are. There's a quote from that letter Mr. Williams wrote to the young man that I want to share with you that stopped me in my tracks. And then it actually made me cry multiple times when I read this quote. And I'll tell you why. It's about the power in the life of small things. In the last letter, Mr. Williams writes to the young man. He says the playground, this playground at the end of the story, is something that that you find out that the ladies only simply wanted a playground so that children could play. Mr. Williams ends up using the last moments of his life to ensure that these kids had something as small as a playground. And he says, the playground, sir, will go the way of most of the small things. It may go into disrepair. It may be forgotten. It may, in some sense, be covered and lost by time. We cannot assure ourselves that we have created or erected a lasting monument. Should it be less clear to what end you are directing your daily efforts when it seems as if you're going to be reduced to being Mr. Zombie? We'll call that little playground. And then from there, endure. Remember, things change, things die, but things live on. So all I'm just trying to say is that, like, the only reason why any of us are here today is because there have been small things that have happened in our lives that is a part of our spiritual archive that has brought us here to this moment. And if we hope, either as people or a nation, to move forward, to dig deep, as the poet Mary Oliver said, that our job as people of faith, as writers, as poets, as musicians, as parents, as lovers, as healers, it's not just to make the world go round, but our job is to move the world forward. If we are to do those things, then we got to remember the power of small things and to add daily to our spiritual archive as best we can. That's all I came to tell you. Going forward, do the best you can with the small things that you have. Thank you.
Oh, Dante, so moving. As you see, I don't know if you can see the comments from where you are on your phone, but yeah, Larry says, um, revisit our spiritual archive with an inspiration to pick up the journal.
Mm-hmm.
I remember
And
my dad was a preacher and he had his little pocket journal like that in his pocket at every moment of every day, no matter where we went, because everything was potentially part of that spiritual archive. And as a preacher, he was constantly scribbling down the things people said, the things that he saw, the yeah, so important. You mentioned the loss of vitality leading to the loss of identity, and there's a great deal in your book about experiencing that loss of identity. I wonder if you can share something about that with us.
yeah, indeed, indeed. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Well, okay, perfect. Because the rain just started where I'm at.
Oh,
As if things couldn't get worse.
be safe.
You good? Okay. Um, yeah, I think for many of us, we lose. I think sometimes, oh, this might actually might be better. No, that's not going to be good. That's okay. It might be good that way.
That's good.
Okay,
Yeah,
this
that's
is good
better.
right here.
I can
I
see
should
you
have actually
better.
had this. I should have had it this way to begin with. Um, so I think many of us, you know, that it reminds me of almost like my coach back in. Are you good with it this way, man? It reminds me back of my coach in Clemson when I was playing football, where I played defensive back. And one of the things about defensive back is like the most important thing is to have your eyes in the right place. And if you don't have your eyes in the right place, you're going to be lost, you're going to be exposed, you're going to be lagging, all these things that can happen. There's so many possibilities of negative things happening. I think so many of us, when I think about my book, I think much of my journey has been almost me attempting to recorrect my eyes, just kind of reconstruct my eyes to kind of, you know, the eye, as Ocean Vuong says, is like God's loneliest creation, because the eye, sees so much. And the only really, you know, if we not have lost our sight, the eye honestly is the first way we interpret the world. It's the way we kind of and it's honestly the most lasting way in a way we interpret the world because one's brain really processes information through the eye and what we see. And a lot of times we lose our way because we have our eyes in the wrong place. Whether it's I got my eye on what somebody else has, I have my eye on what I can gain, I have my eye on what I have lost, I have my eye on the places I have not been or the things I can't do. And more times than not, when the eye is looking elsewhere rather than what's in front of you, the eye, in some sense, is always a almost like shameful eye or a bullying eye. It's like the eye is it's not just a lonely creation; it's a very mean creation because oftentimes the eye doesn't name honestly or interprets honestly what's in front of us. So like whether I was going through the white evangelical church or like, leaving, my black Pentecostal upbringing, my eyes were in places that I thought were going to bring me affirmation. But in a very real way, they took from me, more than they gave. And so I think when I think about like identity and vitality, it's very much connected to like what the eye is seeing, what the eye is interpreting, and where our eyes are at. So I think if one wants to recorrect the eye, then one has to attempt courageously and consistently to like redirect the eye in the right place so that it's looking correctly and naming things as they are in front of us and staying present in the present moment. And I think a lot of times, like so much of me getting off track is like either I'm living too deep into the past or too far into the future, and not what I can behold in front of me right now in this present moment.
Thank you. And I'm just thinking that for those who have not delved into your book yet, can you give a little bit about, you're talking about leaving your Black Pentecostal background, joining the white evangelical church, then getting back to
Yeah,
your roots in your
yeah,
tradition. Can you just
yes,
explain that a little
yeah,
bit?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I was raised Pentecostal, raised Pentecostal. I'm from South Carolina, raised in rural South Carolina, rural America. I'm a product of rural America, and was raised in the Pentecostal church until I was about 18. Went off to Clemson University, a predominantly white institution. Ended up playing football and ended up going to a white evangelical church during that moment. And one of the things I didn't realize is that like going to a white evangelical church, you oftentimes are like socialized into the environment that you are in. And so you begin to interpret and name and act within the world based on the ways in which, those kind of social spaces and environments shape you. And if anything, if we know anything about, the white evangelical church, especially as it's, played out in American history, it has oftentimes been on the wrong side of history. It has been not, loving and liberating, but oftentimes regressive and oppressive. It has lacked the necessary imagination to like generate solidarity among people who are different. And a lot of times what I found is that you can tell a lot about a person's faith based on who can exist around them. And so what I begin to realize is that like I began to diminish parts of myself, especially my blackness in that space because it didn't prioritize. And anything that's not cherished or prioritized will never be protected. It would always be criminalized or in some sense diminished. And so I went through years and years and years of diminishing. And then I ended up being involved next time. And as I tell people, it's very hard to remain evangelical after reading James Baldwin. And after reading James Baldwin, it set me on a journey in which I wanted to really find myself and find God myself. As Alexander Bird, I really went on an attempt to find myself and find who was God to me, and it led me to where I am right now, Reverend Danté Stewart, and the writer, poet, and things like that. It's really, truly, honestly, a journey of grief, but in some sense, not just what grief does to you, but what you can do with your grief and turn your grief into transformative meaning. And so that's what I did, and that's shouting in the fire. Sorry, I got a cough in my throat. Sorry.
No, and I appreciate you naming it as grief. And wanted to just mention that we've had two other authors come and talk to us, Brian McLaren and Caitlin Curtis, both
Two of whom I love. They're amazing.
both raised in white evangelical contexts, and both who have left those. Caitlin to reclaim her indigenous tradition, and Brian to kind of forge a new progressive Christianity. But I'm thinking, what would you say to the people who are part of the Christian church that does not feed them, does not feel comfortable for them, but they don't have another place that is actually home for them, like Caitlin going to her indigenous roots, you going to your Pentecostal roots. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like they
I
need to
think,
leave
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. I want it. It's almost like right now. What I think is going to happen post the second Trump presidency is that you're going to see another mass exodus of people from many of their religious spaces because of the way polling went and the way religious communities, after what we have seen, continue to stand with someone who is only kind of using Christianity for their own personal selfish gains. And I think we're going to see, I think we're going to see another mass exodus of like religious people, and things like that. And so, and I talk to these people at the coffee shop all the time, and I tell them, honestly, I tell, number one, I listen to them, and I don't attempt to like correct their journeys, or name their journeys for them. I try and let them, or in some sense, discover, their own journeys. It's like, you know, you have to be able to go through it. The poet Robert Frost, the only way out is through. And I think a lot of times we want to quickly move past, going from this environment to this next environment and just find home again so quickly. And that's just not how life works because there's so much to still process. So I think what I've been telling people is like, yo, like give yourself the time, the space, and the patience to process what you're feeling and what you're going through. Don't rush past the grief. Don't rush past the questions. If anything, like the greatest threat to faith is not doubt or questions. The greatest threat to faith is certainty because certainty doesn't allow you remain open to finding God again in the next place. So you think about the Bible. One of the things I love about the Bible is that the Bible is like a book that's just there's so many stories in the Bible that don't make sense. They just don't make sense. But I appreciate that they don't make sense because if they did make sense, then we would oftentimes do what we religious people do all the time. It make too much sense, so we make a doctrine out of it. And so we be like, okay, it make too much sense. So it's just like, all right, everybody got to believe it. This is a belief. So women obey your husbands like Christ loved the church. That makes sense. So let's just go and make a whole doctrine on it. And so I think the stories that don't make sense, I think we need to lean into the stories that don't make sense because we would find a God that's flexible, that moves alongside us. And one of the stories I love is that like the children of Israel, when they were wandering in the desert, and they were wandering after their exodus, and they spent those moments wandering for 40 years, a journey that was supposed to take a little bit of time, ended up going on for a long time. And the thing that I love about that journey is that, like, wherever they went, God was there. Wherever they stepped, God was there. Whether it was in the daytime, God was in the cloud by day. Whether it was in the nighttime, he was in a pillar of fire by night. And so what's wild is that even in some sense, like maybe God isn't found always in the neatly constructed edifice where God is named and God is seen and God is quote unquote experienced. Maybe God is like a cloud or a fire. That's like very indigenous to be like God the cloud or God the fire. But God was there. It's like, there are things that take place. There are moments that we can see and interpret and say, you know what? I choose to trust that wherever I end up, whether it takes me a short time or a long time, God is there. So that's why I would help people say, process where you've been and what it has done to you. But realize that wherever you step, God is there. And that faith, in some sense, is always remaining open to experiencing God again, to finding deeper meaning of who we are, where we're meant to be. Faith is a journey. I know it's cliche, but faith is indeed a journey. And as any journey, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that beginning and middle and end is not always neatly constructed. And so every single, to use the writer term, the narrative arc, everybody has a narrative arc of their faith journey. And what kind of think about like if the journey went from point A to point B so quickly, how flat the narrative of our lives would be. So I would say lean into the narrative that's unfolding before you. Process it and realize that, God is still there in the cloud. God is still there in the fire by night. Whether you're worrying or whether you're anxious or things like that, I assure you, if you trust your gut, you trust your God, you're going the right way.
Mm. I'm putting a quote in the chat right now from your book because I feel as if when you were speaking there, it was bringing to mind this quote. And I know you can't see the chat right now, so I'm going to read you what other people have put in the chat. But I want to read this quote of yours first, just following what you were saying. And I can't remember what chapter this is from. You talk about coming of age in a time of public lynchings has made me realize that I need more than words in those moments. I want to feel love. I wish you were reading this in your voice, not me in my voice. I want to feel loved in all the
Oh,
ways
your voice is great.
that I
I love it.
feel. I want to feel love in all the ways that I feel love has failed. I want to know that in this country, bodies like ours will be loved, serious love. We need what Jesus called neighbor love. We need what Martin Luther King Jr. called redemptive love. We need what Toni Morrison called self-love. We need what Bell Hooks called committed love. We need what Kizzy Lamont called responsible love. James Baldwin was right. Love did not begin and end the way we thought it did. Love is war. Love is about growing up. It is about facing ourselves and our country and exposing the ways both fail to love us. I like underlined that and underlined it and underlined that part. And when you're talking about faith being a journey, love is being a journey and figuring it out.
Oh yes. Because in some sense, I was actually doing an event on Baldwin with one of my dear friends, Cree Miles, out of Milwaukee, and we were talking about Baldwin and love. And one of the things I did this in my graduate work. I had a whole section on Baldwin's conception of love. And one of the things I began to notice is I had to distill it in one sentence, which does not do justice to either the definition of love or Baldwin. But if I attempted to distill love into one singular definition, it would be love is attempting to remain open to the questions of our existence together. Love is attempting to remain open to the questions of our existence together. So, like, if I love my wife, then I have to remain open to the questions of like us together. I have to account for who she is. I have to be accountable to who she is and what she desires and what she wants. Just like my children, they're human beings. So if I love my children, then I have to remain open to the questions of our existence together. So when I make a mistake, I have to question that. When I just when they feel hurt, when they feel unsafe, or when they feel happy, I have to remain open to the questions of our existence together. When I think about, our nation, you think about like whether you're immigrant, whether you're black, whether you're white, whether you're Arab, Palestinian, Israeli, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, whoever you are, Republican, Democrat, like one of the things that we're lacking in our country, and especially in our places of faith, is an openness to the questions of our existence together. What we're simply doing is like leaning into dehumanization and distrust. And anytime the people, the demos, or the orcas, I think it's orcas, is one of them. But demos, I think in the Greek is on the democracy, the people, and the orcas is like more of the church, the religious folk. Whenever either of those segments of a population, the first response to another person is distrust and dehumanization, then destabilization happens. And when destabilization happens, democracy crumbles. It, it, and I'll say with Reinhold Niebuhr, one can speak with a dogmatism to which all of history justifies. Reinhold Niebuhr makes that statement in 1932. A moral man and immoral society. One can speak with a dogmatism which all history justifies that, like, when our first response or lasting response to one another is dehumanization and distrust, then destabilization corrodes our community. And what we need together is a kind of love that remains accountable to one another. And honestly, I wrote a piece this year on reading James Baldwin in an election year. And as I began to see like things unfold on social media, things unfold on Palestine and Israel, things unfold, whether one called it genocide or not, whether one, agreed with student protesters or not. Like one of the things I began to see unfold is like, yo, like we lack accountability to one another's humanity. And I'm not saying like, yo, you gotta like both sides that are like, my friend Robert says we can disagree with one another as long as our disagreement ain't rooted in my inhumanity or my right to exist. So that's not it. Like that statement is very true. Like we can disagree, but not that disagreement is about like my humanity or my right to exist. But that is also to suggest that like disagreement can be a comma and not a period. Or disagreement can be a semicolon instead of a period. So like we can disagree, and that's okay. And that can be one part. But then at some point, something has to take place after it, in which, like, as Baldwin says, we would love will force them to see themselves as they are and begin to change. So it's not just being okay with the way things are, but it's actually like, yo, like things ain't cool, things gotta change, we gotta do better. And we have to stay accountable to one another in that regard. And I think like we lack so much love because we are not accountable to people. We're not accountable to people who are different than us, who look like different, who vote different, who look different, who act different, who think different. That's not to say that like you just gotta agree with them in everything they do or say like they're right. Because I would never expect, somebody that's like me saying like, all right, you're on the Israeli side, you're on the Palestine side, and y'all going just like kumbaya. Like, nah, y'all got some stuff y'all got to work through. Even if you're in America, y'all got a lot y'all got to work through. But like, you should be willing at least to work through that and do it with a commitment to the and not just simply the or. You can have the or, but we also have to have the and because we as human beings are layered creatures. And as layered creatures, we hold multitudes. And it's like, one of the lessons I learned as a Pentecostal, as a young kid, you got to be okay with holding everything that a person possesses, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the indifferent. We won't always make the right choices in that, but we should at least be trying to attempt to make the best choices we can.
That feels so meaningful right now for me because I was in a really beautiful conversation yesterday that held that and that or with a dear Jewish friend and a dear Muslim friend and a couple of dear Christian friends, opening their hearts in a way that was just really, really powerful, and finding in some ways that they could um, hold one another's pain, and in some ways they couldn't. And that and the or was present there. Thank you for that. Could you take that disagreement level to your chapter on rage? Because I love your statement in that chapter where you say rage can be the fuel for love and a bomb for healing.
Mm.
And I
And
think
you're quoting things that did not even wrote. you know?
you wrote that. So you
uh,
said when you read
let me
Nehemiah,
attempt to say something about it. Yeah. Oh yeah, Nehemiah 5.
when you read
Yeah,
that
yeah.
and you said, oh, there was someone angry in the Bible, and you realized that there was space for rage for the first time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll never forget reading Nehemiah 5 where he was angry. Nehemiah was angry that like his people were getting shorted in the land and things like that. And he was angry about it. And he prayed about it, he thought about it, he wrote about it, and he brought charges against the people who, who did the bad things. And so like I think for me, when I think about like rage provides a sense of clarity. Like rage is clarifying. It tells the truth about the way things are and the way that they need to change. So Saul Alinsky has a really good book entitled Rules for Radicals, which I love, written in 1971, where he talks about, anger, as like anger that allows like us to think about the world as it should be or can be and the world as it is. So like I think rage is clarifying, but rage and anger can also like lead to deeper knowledge and commitment. And so like I think like the anger that people feel at injustice, whether it's in civil rights movements, student movements, you know, I don't know, in any movement, for justice, it can lead to deeper commitment because it shows that like, yo, like we are stronger together. And because we're collectively angry at something, then we can generate collective power. The tough part is, kind of mitigating anger and bridging anger with wisdom, which is much harder to do for people to do. And I think anger has to be rooted in maturity. Like you need young anger, but you also need some seasoned anger too.
Hmm.
Some seasoned anger that knows how to like move to get policy change. Some seasoned anger that knows how to move to keep people together when we're all angry together. So I think to me, like anger and rage is a clarifying force, but it's also like a leads to deeper commitment together. And it's like there's something, but anger also has to give weight to something deeper, which to me is once again love, commitment, courage. Anger, anger to me is almost like the first quarter of a football game. It is only meant to galvanize. It is never meant to be a playbook.
Hmm. Danté, one of the things
But
that
you can't. But you can't win the game without it. Let me say that.
and
You
now he's
can't
talking
win the game
football.
without it.
Uh-oh.
Some people want to win the game without anger. You can't win the game without it. Let me be clear. It ain't a playbook. It's a part.
So Danté was a football player, and people who know me well on this line right here know that I don't know anything about football. Um, but Danté, one of the most beautiful things about this community is there are people who are here live, and there are people who will now watch this recording afterwards and who will gather on Saturday from different continents in discussion about this recording that they're watching. It's always incredibly moving, but you are not getting the opportunity to see what is one of the beautiful things that happens in these live sessions, and that is that community is formed in the chat as people are having conversation and responding to what you're saying in the chat and to one another. So I want to give you all who are here and putting these beautiful things in the chat to have a chance to talk to Danté yourselves. I'm going to turn off the recording because this is the part that will be sent to those who are going to watch this afterwards, so that the rest of you can feel comfortable coming online and talking to him for a few minutes.